South African consumers continue to struggle to make ends meet due to the higher cost of living. And while some relief has started to come through in the form of lower interest rates, the level of indebtedness means many consumers are unlikely to feel much of the benefit at this stage. Well, to discuss the immediate impact of the 50 basis cumulative rate cuts that we've received from the Reserve Bank and how consumers can weather continued difficult financial times, I'm joined in studio by Owen Khumalo. He's the CEO at Weaver Investment Management. Thank you so much, Owen, for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes, super stuff. So the repo rate came down by 25 basis points effective last Friday. We've had a cumulative 50 basis point cut since September. Broadly speaking, what sort of impact should this be having on the consumer?
Okay, so there are two sides to the impact. Let me start with the positive. So for those consumers that are paying off debt, like home loans, car loans, credit cards, it's good news whenever we have an interest rate cut. So it means their monthly repayments will go low, especially those that are on variable interest rates. So the bank, where they've borrowed the money, will lower the interest rate that affects their monthly repayment. So that's good news. On the bad side of the matter is those investors who rely on interest-bearing investments to fund their income, especially retirees that are mainly invested in interest-bearing investments such as bonds and money market instruments. It then means that the interest rate they earn on their investments is going to be slightly lower going forward.
Indeed. So for those people who have home loans, vehicle loans, what sort of impact will we have seen in the last couple of months, given the 50 basis cumulative cut?
There's been some relief. For example, as I said, especially those on variable interest rates. And I did a quick calculation. If for a customer with a bond of just under 1.5 million rand, the cumulative impact of the two rate cuts in September and now last week would be in the region of plus minus 500 saving from what they were paying prior to the interest rate cuts.
That's not too bad.
That's not too bad, especially if it's per month, yes.
Exactly. But now, when we look at what the Reserve Bank Governor Lesetja Kganyago had to say about inflation, on the one hand, he sounded very upbeat that it is going to be low for quite some time. But then on the other hand, he did raise the possibility that, come late 2025, we're going to see it start increasing and maybe going beyond the midpoint of the target, 4.6%, somewhere there, and then maybe stabilizing going into 2026. But despite having a good kind of outlook for inflation in the short term, they didn't go the full way and give us a 50 basis cut. So based on what he had to say and what you know, what do you anticipate we're going to get in the way of interest rate cuts? Is it going to be a shallow cut from the beginning of September to whenever? Yeah,
the Reserve Bank and the money that makes decisions on interest rates are erring on the side of caution. First rate cut in September, a lot of people expected them to cut by 50 basis points following the Federal Reserve in the US, but they went with 25 basis points and they followed again now last week. Even though inflation, as you say, has been coming down quite gradually. In fact, the number for October, the CPI number for October came in at 2.8%, and that came down from 3.8% in September. And that's way below the Reserve Bank's mid-range of that target of 3 to 6%.
A full percentage point.
Exactly, which is 4.5%. But I think why they're erring on the side of caution is there are some headwinds. Yes, inflation is a good driver for the direction of interest rates, whether they continue cutting deeper or maybe at 25 basis points. But they're cognizant of the geopolitics. And we know there were elections in the US recently and Donald Trump won. And one of the key issues he raised in his campaign was hiking tariffs with China and some parts of Europe, but mainly with China. And China says we will retaliate, and if he does that, then there will be a trade war. And at the end of the day, it's the consumer that carries the burden of those trade wars, and that might fuel inflation.
Yeah.
So if inflation then gets to start ticking up, which we have seen in Europe and we've seen in the US, although by smaller margins. But if that persists going into 2025 and 2026, then we might see a slowdown in terms of rate cuts. I don't think we've got a danger of interest rates being raised again in future or in the near future. But at the moment, we are looking at not so deep interest rate cuts. We've seen the Federal Reserve, when they cut by 50 basis points, they followed with 25 basis points. So it's not surprising if inflation ticks up to see the Reserve Bank actually holding rates for a while and looking at the data, because they said it's going to be data dependent, and then deciding which direction to take.
Oh, and I want to get your comment on this lastly. We're in Black Friday season. The festive season is around the corner. Some people may have the benefit of having tapped onto their two-pot. Some people may be getting their 13th check. You know, you get that false sense of security. You're flush with cash. And then there's January, right? Yes. So based on all these factors, what's your advice about how people should work with the limited resources that they have, given all the challenges that we do have financially and economically?
Yeah, I think consumers, those who are fortunate enough to be a member of a retirement fund and they've got access to their two-pot savings, should treat that not as a windfall to do as they please with or to go wild on Black Friday. We know one of the drivers of implementing the two-pot system was that South Africans generally were indebted. We're highly indebted, and the high cost of servicing that debt is impacting on households' ability to save. So first prize, if you've got some access to your two-pot savings, try and use that to extinguish debt. But when it comes to Black Friday specials, be savvy as a consumer. Only buy the essentials that you really need, but also plan ahead. You know, Black Friday officially kicks off this Friday, the 29th of November. But we've seen specials being put out for weeks now. So do your research and see where the prices are going. Don't just spend or buy because something is said to be on special. Make sure that it's actually something you need, but it's actually at a reasonable price. And don't overspend. Try not to use your credit card because there's a temptation to just go wild and swipe. Try and use cash, try and use your debit card, but have a budget. What are you going to spend this Black Friday, and what are you going to spend it on?
Yeah, absolutely. That's really good advice. Thank you so much, Owen. That was Owen Khumalo. He's the CEO at Weaver Investment Management.